Today on Finding Common Ground, we're going to be talking to the Executive Director and the State Chair for New York for the National Council for Severe Autism. We're going to talk about what that looks like for families, how isolating it can be, and some of their initiatives that are making it better for people across the country.
We have so much more understanding in that it's not just this subjective information. This is more, we have actual pictures of what a neuron looks like that's impacted by SYNGAP, and I'm able to use those images in my advocacy and say, behavior is not a choice for her. Her brain is fundamentally different.
Welcome back to Finding Common Ground with Heather and Steve. Today we will be talking about severe autism. We have two different guests, and Steve, this was a topic that we've discussed a few times, not on the air, and we have a lot of families that we know of that are affected by profound autism or severe autism. And so why don't you explain your connection to this group, the people that we have on today?
My advocacy started, locally with my own son, 35-year-old autistic child, very severe symptoms in the very beginning. He's much better now. But in my search for putting supports and things like that around him, my advocacy grew from local to regional and state. And I happened to, I'm not even sure how I ran into Tammy in the very beginning, but it was a great connection. It was kind of what I was looking for to continue learning more every day, not just for my own son, but for all the other people that I advocate for. There's a whole lot of people in the middle of the states, and we're kind of in the middle of the state, a lot of rural that have no idea where they can get some supports for autism, let alone, the few agencies that they deal with. So I thought of trying to reach out there more farther out and trying to learn more about what you guys did at NCSA. And I had several meetings with Tammy, and we kind of clicked, and we're looking at the same goals, I think, that what we wanted to do for New York State to bring an awareness to severe autism. And so I'm really glad that I met Tammy, and I got a chance to meet Jackie recently, and hopefully I'll be able to I'm working on some things I'm going to kick to you with Jackie also on the national level with some of the things that we're doing locally. So we really appreciate you coming on, especially last minute. So
this is great. This is going to be a great discussion. So we have Jackie Kancir here. She's the Executive Director for the National Council on Severe Autism, and Tammy Snyder, who's the State Chair for NCSA. And they are going to bring us a wealth of information, but also that lived experience that Steve and I both have as well. It would be great to learn a little bit about you and how you arrived here, not just in this position, but where you are in life right now. Jackie, do you mind starting?
Sure. I am actually third generation advocate, so I guess I was kind of born into it. My family, pretty sure just about everybody when I was growing up was working in the old state hospitals in Pennsylvania. And pretty much everybody in our town was. It was, the job to have. And my brother has developmental disabilities, though he needs much lower supports than my daughter. But I grew up in that, watching my mother fight for his services. And as much as we have to fight, imagine in the 80s or 90s. But what was really unique is I didn't recognize it, of course, until I was older, but getting to watch my mother navigate between two very different needs. She had 3 children. My youngest brother didn't need supports, but she had me as a gifted child needing supports that they weren't even considered any kind of special need back then. You didn't get an IEP or anything. But she advocated very strongly for my education and to ensure that I had the proper challenges that I needed. And also on a very different content from my brother. And that became very useful when I was older, and being able to look back, and I think really drives my commitment to individualized supports, person-centered support, being able to grow up and seeing how she navigated that. But I've been an advocate all my adult life as well, and I had my daughter with disabilities at 23, and just been a journey from there. Most of my advocacy when she was younger was in disability education, but as she got older, it branched into HCBS and healthcare, and just kept moving through the different circles as we do, and now I'm here.
Thank you. And I know that just from your bio that she also has a rare genetic condition. Is that her, I would say, like the presenting problem or whatever, if you're in the medical field, the thing that probably challenges her the most?
Yeah, so there was the Autism Science Foundation did a pretty good podcast on this last year on the syndromic autism and how do we define it now, and they're really leaning into more of she has profound autism with a genetic identifier of SYNGAP1. And it's this big mouthful of things, but everything that she has as the conditions, including Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, which is a major seizure disorder, profound autism, the mobility, all the different GI issues, catatonia, it all stems from a simple C switching with a T on her 6th chromosome. And that is the source of everything. But that's SYNGAP1 related disorder, yes.
Yeah, and I bring it up, my daughter who has the complex medical needs, Devin, she also has a really rare genetic marker. And when we first started learning about it, people would say, it's kind of like autism. It's kind of like autism. It's kind of like autism with epilepsy, or it's kind of like autism with cerebral palsy. And I thought, what is it? And that's the hardest part, because if you have cerebral palsy or autism, it's a spectrum. There's all different things. But when you have something that's very specific like that, it feels like there should be specific symptoms that go along with it, like a playbook, something you can read and understand and project what's going to happen. And kids just don't work that way. People don't, right? They're each so different. So I'm sure
we didn't even have a diagnosis until she was 16, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's 2019 that we got a diagnosis, because her doctors, she's always had really good medical care. We were in Pittsburgh and Nashville. She's always had really out-of-the-box medical care. But they knew at 2 or 3 that this was most likely not a kid that just really was unlucky and got all these different conditions. And they really thought that there was one thing causing all of the challenges she was having. And they thought genetics. So they ran a ton of tests. They ran a FISH test, microarray, things that were really cutting edge back then. They were thinking Angelman's, but it came back negative. So we spent the majority of her life with 2 primary diagnoses of autism and Lennox-Gastaut. And then at 16, when we retested, it came back finally, but it hadn't been discovered in any human until 2009. And the last time she had been tested was 2006. So, yeah, a long diagnostic odyssey for us.
Yeah, that's very similar to our story. They always said that she had a clinical diagnosis of Angelman's, because they couldn't prove it with genetics. So she ends up having AGO2. It doesn't really even have a name. Sometimes it's called Agranot, and there's only a handful of people in the world that are identified now. We know, though, like you said, there's more people. It's just they haven't had the test, or when they were tested, they weren't looking for those things. And as the audience is listening, it's not that we want labels for our kids, but for some reason, knowing that there's a name for it and that there's other people that maybe are living the same path and on the same journey, it is comforting. When they told me Angelman's, I ran out and okay, guys, this was a while ago, and you could not use the internet like you could use it now. And I could only find one book on Angelman's, and I ordered it. It was a medical textbook, and I flipped through all the pages, and there was like one paragraph on Angelman's. And I was like, oh my goodness, I literally know nothing about this. And that's really unsettling as a parent. And you were coming from a family that knew stuff, right? You already had some experiences.
Yeah, and they even still to this day, nearly everybody in the family still works in the medical field of some discipline. And, you know, with SYNCAP 1, when she was first diagnosed, we really knew nothing. There's very little research out there. We had a little more than you did diagnosed. I think she was like the 243rd patient or something. She was first in Tennessee. And now we have 8 families diagnosed in Tennessee. We have over 400 in the United States, over 1,500 worldwide, just in 6 years. The other organization that I'm with, the SYNCAP Research Fund, I'm the patient advocacy director for them. The leadership team there is incredible. The people are incredible, and they have just driven so many answers. We have so much more understanding in that it's not just this subjective information. This is more, we have actual pictures of what a neuron looks like that's impacted by SYNCAP, and I'm able to use those images in my advocacy and say, you know, behavior is not a choice for her. Her brain is fundamentally different. And it's then been able to help me with my autism advocacy, because there is so much of that. Well, is it really just a social model, or, you know, and is the medical model ableist? And it's like, no, like her brain is fundamentally different. And that is why this is happening. And I don't care if you put her alone in a cave in some other country, she would still have autism. This is something she's going to need support for the rest of her life with. So yeah, it's been everything to find the actual diagnosis and the cause.
And when you're working with systems that continually ask you to recertify to prove the condition still exists, it's really frustrating for parents, but at the same time, now you have something. So if you're a parent and you're listening to this, or you have a family member that just presents in a very unique way, or they just have that whole constellation of symptoms, and just like you said, Jackie, there's no way she was just so lucky to get, 6 different things, right? There's probably a name for it, and whether or not we know what that name is or what genetic component is in there, ask your doctors about it. There's foundations that will actually pay for the testing because they're collecting that data and they want to know more. And that's how we found out about AGO2 for Devin. So I really encourage people not just to take the first diagnosis and just assume it's right and just keep plowing ahead. If things don't fit, if things don't feel right, or you need more information, ask. There's specialists out there. There's people who really have dedicated their life's work to figuring these things out, and you won't know if you don't ask. And sometimes it's hard to, though. I don't know. Tammy, how you can introduce yourself and tell us a little of your story, but maybe you could start out with your personal connection to autism.
I have a son that is 16 years old with severe autism and cognitively delayed, and he has PANS and PANDAS, which causes a plethora of other diagnoses, OCD and aggression and tics at times, and severe separation anxiety, food aversion, sensory issues, all that fun stuff. And I also have another daughter who is high functioning autistic, like we were talking about, that they're all autism now, but she doesn't even have an IEP or even a 504 plan, so that's where she's at. It took a long time to get where we are with her. She definitely had a lot of behaviors, but she's doing great now. So, but it does make it difficult living in a house with two different spectrums of the autism, because the higher functioning one is not very, she's not very, I guess, sympathetic sometimes when it comes to her brother.
Right, and that's part of the condition, right? Not being able to take somebody else's perspective, so
Yeah.
you just think that happens sometimes. And I can relate. I'm sure Steve can relate too. He's had so many different kids that come to his home through foster care that it's really wonderful for them to be around other children and have peers and grow up with people next to them. But it doesn't mean it always is going to be, sweet and fun and everything's going to go smoothly.
Exactly. She's getting better though. But as far as what brought me to NCSA is, I guess so I didn't have actually a clue what I wanted to do when I went to college. I switched my major a few times. And I was just drawn to the social worky stuff. And I had cousins growing up that had special needs. I had one cousin with a traumatic brain injury and cerebral palsy, and then another cousin that had some sort of genetic thing. I don't know what it was back then. I was very young, but also blatantly severely autistic. I don't even think she was diagnosed with that back then until later on. So I was definitely like familiar with people with disabilities, and definitely helped me with wanting to learn more and question things, and watching my aunt advocate tirelessly for her daughter, and being so close with them, because I had my daughter at the time, and they were only 2 years apart, and so we were, we did birthday parties and all that kind of fun stuff together. But as I got into my social work field, I ended up going into OPWDD, and I absolutely loved working for the group homes, loved working with the clients. I was actually very nervous to work around any other adults with autism, because I didn't know how to manage that. I mean, I love them, but as far as just not knowing what to do. So when I ended up having my son, I definitely couldn't oversee group homes anymore, because I couldn't work 20 hours a day. Because right away, within a few months, I knew something was going on with him. Probably at his 4-month, 5-month checkpoint. But at that time, they're like, "You're crazy. There's nothing wrong with him. We would never be able to know that at this early on." And through months of arguing that point, at about 18 months, he was diagnosed. And anyway, so then what I do now is I work for the TBI NHCD waiver, which is another form of advocacy, and I love it, and I also do it because I can work around my son's schedule, which he hasn't actually been in school for many years. He's 16 now, so about 5 years. Partly his anxiety triggered his Cans and Pandas, where he was not able to go to school anymore. It was taking me 3 to 4 hours to try to get him out of my car every morning. And after 2 years of dedication to that, I was like, okay, I cannot do this anymore. We got bills to pay, unfortunately.
Right. For our audience, I'm sorry to interrupt, but could you explain the conditions that you mentioned? I know what you're talking about, but we're making a conscious effort, because we all talk in acronyms to make sure that, people know when you're talking about panda, that it's not the bear. No,
It's not the bear.
Just to give people the, an idea of what you were dealing with at that time, or now too.
So he obviously has severe autism, and a lot of people know your typical autism symptoms, but when you throw an autoimmune disorder on top of the autism, it's basically brain inflammation. His immune system is attacking his brain versus, attacking a virus or something, whatever is causing the trigger. And when PANS it could be basically anything that triggers his symptoms. It can be strep throat, it can be a toxin, it can be numerous things, but even a cold, it can be a cold sore. And with a nonverbal child, it's sometimes very hard to figure out what the heck is going on with him. And Cans and Pandas isn't like a diagnosis that is easily to come by. You have to advocate for that diagnosis as well, and do all the research to figure out what's going on with that. But with that comes a lot of severe separation anxiety. He never wants to be away from me. It takes me hours. My staff gets to my home super early in the morning. It takes me hours of him working himself up to leave, for me to leave every day with his, $1 million checklist. He basically makes a deal with me every morning. And then he has his OCD is very, very strict. It's not that people think OCD, oh, he wants to wash his hands, and always he doesn't want to wash his hands. It's just a very controlling thing to make him feel more secure and safe. I got to be home exactly when that sun is going down. He does, or he's pacing. He's pacing back and forth until I get home. His siblings, same way. He doesn't even like them very much, but he still wants them at home when they're supposed to be. So we have to, at times, if my mom comes to grab them or whatever the situation is, my mom's got to park down the street. I got to distract him. They got to sneak out the house. It's the whole thing. But we make it work so that they still get to, do some sort of life. And then, but also the OCD, if we're not getting it away, which is for like everything, it comes with severe aggression and self-induced behaviors and, situations where we're still dealing with that, the basement issues where we're trying to knock down heater ducts and rip off, the hot water pipes that attach to the, from the gas tanks and things like that. So we have many, many long nights, and I don't think he wants to do any of that stuff. It's exhausting for him, but his brain just gets stuck, and we just get through it. But
it's interesting the coping mechanisms they come up with, the things that help them reset when they're dysregulated. In the beginning, I say it's easy, but this is not easy when it's the middle of the night. My daughter, if a car ride could reset her, it gives her the sensory input, the motion feels good. We don't even have to have the radio on, but it would just reset her, and then she would feel like herself again. It seems simple, but, when you've given a car ride at 1 a.m. and then it's 2 a.m. and now 3 a.m., she's asking for the third car ride, and you're like, I'm going to lose my mind. Like, I have to sleep and I shouldn't be driving because I'm very tired. Then they turn to something else, and sometimes the first thing was actually easier in retrospect, but we can't always be there to give the car ride. And I can't imagine the weight of knowing that the connection to you is so strong. You're his safest person, his guide, the person he can count on, his GPS, you show him where to go, and you're consistently, doing what he needs. It's scary for him when you're not there. It's really a fear reaction, and that's the trauma of growing up and not being able to communicate effectively with other people. We get them. We can look at them and have an idea of what's going on, but he knows not everybody can do that. And I think that was one of the hardest things with my daughter, is broadening that circle so that she had other people who she could trust. And I'll be honest, I get jealous sometimes. Like when I see her forehead bumping her helper, or she's kissing them. She kisses like a puppy with her tongue. No, I think, oh, she's giving puppy kisses, to the person here. And it makes me feel good that she's comfortable. But there's always that mama part where you're like, it's hard not to eat it up at the same time, knowing that they do feel safe with you. It's a balance, I guess.
Yeah, we have one staff, and he's actually my nephew, and he's been with us for about 4 years now, and he's actually the only person my son will allow me to leave him with. He's not even his older sister anymore, and there's nobody allowed out in the house, and because it's routine, it's just what we do, and he definitely loves him. Like, he definitely feels safe with him and loves him and all that fun stuff. Like, I don't know what we would do without him. And, we've had in-home ABA for years. We're on a pause right now for the last few months because with demands come, hours of meltdowns after work. And it was just getting very unsafe for his siblings, because when he really just can't win or really just out of control, then it was trying to target his sisters. And obviously I do what I have to do to make sure everybody's safe. But at the end of the day, no teenage girls want their brother pounding on their door for 8 hours, 10 hours, because he won't stop. He just doesn't stop until he feels like he won at the end of the day.
Right.
And
He's got to
again,
even the score in his own way, right? Like through his eyes, it has to make sense. And that's another good place to pause, because when you think about the organization, the NCSA, there are people who are very lonely. You know, they're very isolated when you're in that kind of situation where your child is relying on you so heavily and the systems don't always work, right? I mean, it would be wonderful if you had a full staff and you could, get him used to different people and you could share that, just the weight of it with other people, but it doesn't always work that way. So I'm just thinking out loud, like, in what ways does the National Council for Severe Autism assist families that are in that situation that feel so isolated?
So what we do, we don't offer direct services because we are such a small team, it would be absolutely impossible. One, we do field a ton of outreach. I will say that. So we can connect people to existing services if we know what they are, those kinds of things, a bit of a networking support. But that really led us to initiating the National Grassroots Network, because the original intent of NCSA, when it first formed, it was a small group of parents and professionals in the community that really wanted to ensure that there was this voice in the public discourse, think tank, have you, and the response from the community was just incredible, and we recognized that they needed something more. And as a small nonprofit, how do you give them more? So with the National Grassroots Network, especially amazing chairs like Tammy taking on giant states like New York, it gives people access to other individuals who are living the same kind of life or working with clients that are living the same kind of life. And it puts that discourse back into a local and state level to really talk about the issues that are going on at their kitchen table. OPWDD is DIDD in another state or DDA in another state. And it's hard when you have this national conversation. But when you really talk about what's going on with CDPAP and how is that going to impact other New York families that have really high intense support needs, those conversations aren't happening in every disability organization because they're more broad. And our organization really targets the policy, resources, and solutions for individuals who have the highest level of support needs.
Thank you for that. That helps put perspective on it, because I know that there'll be families that reach out to Steve and I, and they just need to know that there's resources out there. Sometimes, like, other people have told them, but when it comes from another parent, it just holds a different kind of feeling to it. You don't feel like you're being judged, or that it's a prescription you have to follow, that you have to feel guilty if you don't do it the right way. When another mom or dad says, you should try this, then it feels like it's doable, because if they could do it, then you can probably do it too, right? That just knowing there's more people out there is usually the first thing that makes somebody feel better. So Steve, when you were doing, he's in a million different things. So he's all over the place, meeting all these people all the time. You were really drawn to this organization, though, because of the idea that they were putting chapters, across the country, because lots of times it is very local or regional. And then you get into I don't like this about New York and we should move. And, you get into that negative back and forth. But when you back up a second and look at it on a national level, it helps give you perspective. Every state is struggling, guys. Nobody has the magic solution. Nobody's doing it perfectly. But if you look at what's happening in Tennessee and they're doing this, and then you look over here in Pennsylvania or New York, you can pull bits and pieces. And that's how I think we advocate. And that's the perfect opening for you, Steve, because that's you. You're looking for those little nuggets and gems wherever you go and trying to pull them together and bring them to places that didn't even know about it.
Yeah, Heather, as you know, we both know a lot of advocates that have been doing this a long time, and I've never wanted to be one that does it for 30 years and not have results. So I'm looking out of the box. I'm looking for something different, a different way of doing this, and I think it's important that we. That's why one of the things I was drawn to NCSA was the fact that it brings this a light over the national part of this. That autism is across the country. It's not just New York. It's all over the place. And yes, there's different ways in how we handle it, and there's different ways in how they're dealing with it. But it's a national light that has to be shown. And to do it, I think it gives it more credits, I think, when you're across the country. So kudos for, NCSA bringing this to light and trying to get more chapters. I think you said you're in 27 now. I'm sure that down the road, I would imagine you'd have them in all the states. And then that can be powerful. And whether when you go to Washington or when you deal with legislators and they realize that you have chapters in every state dealing with complex issues, because, like Heather said, a lot of times, and I'll go back to what Tammy mentioned. She's got 2 children with different forms of autism. When you do foster care like we do the high ends, high needs children, mostly all of them with autism. We've had, in December, we had 5 different autistic kids in our home, and every single one of them was different. And there isn't one set way to do it. Their complexities, their successes, the things, tribulations are all different, and even how I have to handle it. And so if I get frustrated with that, I can't be alone. It's got to be in many parents across the state and across the country. So I think it's important, like I said, that a group like yours exists. And I hope that, I don't know what your end result is. I'm hoping Jackie, where would you say you would want to take this organization, like in 5 years?
So we by the end of this year, we are hoping to be in every state. Last year was such an incredible transformation. I think the organization grew 5 years last year. It really was just incredible to see. And that was with just a little over half the states getting active. So this is our first year where we're going to have our inaugural DC fly-in. Over the years, I imagine we're planning to have more than one event in a year. So we'll have like a DC fly-in, and maybe we'll have a more casual event, more centralized or moving throughout the country each year for families. But I really look forward to NCSA having a really critical influence in policy in bringing back that the recognition for the need for individualized support and why that is necessary. Trying to unravel a lot of the misunderstandings, the misinformation that might be out there for families that really don't have a voice or who are just in such crisis, and that having a second for advocacy is the last thing they can think of that day. But those of us who have found some semblance of something better than it was, being able to share that, it really is healing for the families. And so I've been really excited to see how the state chairs have all come together, and they meet every month and they are getting to know one another. They're getting to know about the different states. And I think having that open dialogue just to share information is really helpful to all of us, because it's easy, especially those of us that are so isolated taking care of children, and it's hard to have a big social network. It's easy to get inside your own echo chamber, right? But to hear the different experiences going on and the similarities, right? What's similar? What's different? What needs to be better? How can we brainstorm this together to make it better? And that just uncompromising need for change, I think that is really the heart of NCSA.
Is there any legislation that you're endorsing or encouraging sponsorship for? We had somebody here, Dr. Mai Pham from IEC, and she talked to us about the heads up legislation, which would say that people with IDD are medically underserved. It's like a basic thing. it sounds so easy, but once we have that label, that categorization, all these doors open up to us. Insurance companies can bill differently because we're medically underserved. There's grants that come into play to make it more, to incentivize doctors and providers to take our children and our loved ones into their practices, because I'm sure this is not just a New York problem, but it is really, really difficult to find medical care. Providers do not want to take Medicaid. The reimbursement rate is so low, and our kids take longer, and they might have a meltdown. They might break something in the waiting room. They might scare the other families just by being them and just by being nervous in that clinical setting. So I don't know if there's any pieces of legislation that you're particularly drawn to or some concepts for policies, because I agree with you. I think that that's where we have to start. We have to have a couple of rules and frameworks for us to work from that kind of level the playing field for us.
Yeah, I mean, we could be here for days on all the concepts for policies and change and things, but that's one thing that comes through being in leadership with the Grassroots Network. I think Tammy would agree that we all have so many problems that we're facing. And advocacy, it really teaches you have to narrow down to what is it that we think we can accomplish this year, what is most important of those things that we can accomplish this year, and try to focus your attention on your top 3 to 4 priorities. And that allows you the flexibility that if something else comes up, then you can at least address that 1 or 2 other things, but it makes you more efficient in being actually able to affect change. So we have a ton of position statements on our website, but and more policies being developed all the time. But as far as the Heads Up Act, NCSA absolutely supports that. We are really supportive of AADMD, their organization. We love the work they're doing, where we're and the families, they're the providers. We are huge supporters of integrated healthcare. I think that is really the answer as far as the future of medicine and what do we do, how do we best serve this population is going to be through integrated biopsychosocial models. And so we absolutely support those. But as far as legislation this year, what is our top priority? Ask me in February. Because right now with the incoming Congress and administration, things are kind of in flux on the Hill, and we're not really certain what the specific legislation is that's going to be top of our priorities. Last year, it was Autism Cares Act, the direct workforce crisis, caregiver legislation. But this year, it does look like many members of Congress look to champion caregiver legislation. So, of course, that's going to be pretty big. We did a community poll, our policy committee, which Tammy is on for the national organization, and our board also communicated what our positions, our priorities were going to be in 2025. And it was housing is number one. Housing is number one for everybody. It's like 45% of people in our community poll housing. And that includes not just building houses, but innovating new housing models and working on policy to kind of reduce restrictive settings rules or just open up options and get that dialogue going so that we have more housing solutions, because we don't have it figured out yet, obviously, as a country with the crisis that this population's in with housing. So maybe we need something different.
Right. And opening up those regulations and that oversight and making it less cumbersome, that's what we need, because I see this in New York State all the time. If OPWDD can't house everybody that qualifies, and then they give us these rules that they can't follow when we try to do it on our own. And I say, hey, if you can't do that, in your setting and you have this huge budget, then how are we supposed to do that in the community? Please, just let us try different options. Let us have choice. If we want to live in a community with other people like us, let us. It's our choice. If we want to live in an apartment building on our own, that's our choice, right? But you're right, it's more than the brick and mortar. It's more than the roof over your head. Not that we have enough housing stock. There's not enough affordable housing. But let's pretend we did. It's opening legislators and policymakers' minds about housing, because if 75% of our loved ones live at home with us. That's the national average. What happens when we're gone? There's nothing to absorb that many people.
That's what we are working on, getting those stories out. I truly believe that if we are able to facilitate more families getting these stories out, then that is going to change the hearts and minds across America and with Congress, because I think that they're just not included in the conversation because they are so isolated. And so it's not as easy as, well, you should, tell your story. Well, how? How are they going to be comfortable telling their story? So that's something we worked on this past year, was really opening up. We invested heavily in different types of software to make it so that, and Tammy did a beautiful video with her daughters and talking about their experience. So we have you go to ncsautism.org/voice, and you can go through this really simple guided process to make a video for authentic awareness. And it really can be on any topic that's on your heart. Tammy did hers on really kind of crisis support and those services and response in those really hard moments. We've had other parents that did it on how you work on your car when you're taking your son to his adult day programming because there's no transportation, and others that were talking about housing. So it really gives you that robust view. I love the videos. We have options for the blog post, podcast, webinars. We have a new advocacy software. We have letters to the editor, the ability to help them get more press coverage, the Facebook group, LinkedIn, Instagram, just all these different ways that we are trying to continually meet the families where they're at to make sure that they have a voice in this process. And I think that's really going to be where we make some ground.
Because I think that when people think about intellectual and developmental disabilities, it's this little itty bitty segment of the population. You might hear sometimes like 3 to 6% of the population has an IDD. That's so misleading, in my opinion, because it's thousands and thousands of individuals, and then they're the people who love them, and then the outside circle for them, right? Like, if I can't go to work because I'm home with my daughter, then that impacts all my colleagues. That impacts the people I serve at work. There's this ripple effect that we don't talk about a lot. And I think being an unrecognized minority group, in my mind, is one of the reasons that we don't have the same entitlements sometimes or the same considerations. In New York with CDPAP, since you brought it up, that's my thing. No, I kind of talk about CDPAP a lot, but it's what keeps my family together. And we're finding out all these different things as we're pushing through the system, and the state wants to overhaul a system that maybe wasn't perfect, but it was keeping us afloat. Like, it didn't make my life easy. It just made it less hard. And I think that sharing our stories is definitely the way we explain that, because when people are like, I don't know, you want to get paid to take care of your daughter? And I'm like, well, she's under 18, so I can't even do that right now. But I can't go to work if I don't have home care. And I can't take care of my other 3 kids that also have a disability, or see my husband, or shower, or eat, or sleep. Because if you have a child that needs 24/7 supervision and support, not everybody understands what that actually means and how it feels. Because even on Devin's best day, it can be exhausting when we're listening to the same video, the same 20 seconds on repeat for 2 days. It's a different kind of tired sometimes. Sometimes it's not the physical outbursts or the aggression, but that's hard too. So as we wind up our show, one of the hot topics, at least in New York, and I'm assuming this is across the country, are states not having an in-state placement, especially for people who are school age. In New York State, we send people out of state to different programs. People end up in Massachusetts and New Hampshire and Connecticut, and I know there's other programs, and they actually seem like they help. What we find is, we're sending them to these programs on 8 medications, and they're coming back on 1. But then we bring them here, and we still don't know what to do with them. And so they escalate again, and now they're back on 8 meds, and now their group home has restraining order against them. And you can see why families are distrusting not trusting of this, the systems in place, because it feels like we're always getting bad advice, like try this medication or, do this treatment. And I think for parents, it just feels like we're chasing our tails, and that nobody actually is looking out for us. They're just looking at the bottom line maybe and how much things will cost. But do you guys have any perspective on the out-of-state placement or the intensive residential options? Because with severe autism, some families are in that situation where they're not safe to have their child at home.
Yeah, so my daughter went into catatonia when she was 16 or 17. I don't even remember. It was 20. No, it was sooner than that. She was 14. It was 2017 when it first started, but it got really bad a few years after that. And nobody knew what it was. And it's just the most indescribable level of continual crisis, and really, truly continual crisis. And in my state, there's actually a class action suit filed by Disability Rights Tennessee this summer against the Department of Children's Services here. And it's because of this terrible abuse that's going on in DCS against children with IDD. But I have been beating this drum for years of why are the kids there in the first place? Why they're there is for the same reason that, my daughter almost was. That they had no services. There was no hospital in the state would accept her for any kind of even acute treatment, let alone residential treatment. There was nowhere to go for help. And then the waiver administrators said, well, if you voluntarily place her with DCS, they can get her services. And it's like, there's services in the state? We just went through all this for what? Like, why aren't they here at the house then? If there's services, where can we get them? He said, we don't have access to them. As the Medicaid administrator, how do you not have access to them? DCS has a different funding stream, so they have access to them. Well, bottom line is DCS doesn't. Nobody does in the entire state. So what ends up happening is they send them out of state, 38 different states that they've sent our children from Tennessee to. But that's only part of the problem, because then these kids get to be 21 and they're no longer in school and there's still nothing for them. And the conversation keeps getting muffled out by another side of the disability advocacy, justice advocates that have no lived experience whatsoever with this. And so when they hear us talking about the need, this really specialized needs that our children have, it can be misinterpreted that we want them warehoused in these, in Willowbrook. And that's not what we are talking about. People don't understand the modernized institutionalization, the segregation and isolation, the loss of skills, because our children do not have access to meaningful daily activity or even basic medical care.
Right.
Because their needs are so high and nothing in the state can meet it.
And when you're non-speaking, it just escalates everything. Because I think when Devin is in the hospital, I can't leave. I can't leave.
Yeah, no, you can't. You can't.
And there's situations during COVID and the pandemic where families were told that they couldn't be in the emergency room. And you think, then what will happen to them? But it's also sometimes just not safe to bring them home. In New York, we have this skyrocketing trend where people are surrounding their children in the emergency room. They're leaving. And that is not, like you said, because they want to leave. No parent wants to relinquish their parental rights and place their child in the hands of the state and say, I hope you can do this. We know they can't. There is no state that can do it. Nobody loves your child like you do. But at the same time, if you don't have the supports, if they're not people who are going to come rally against, around you when you're in crisis, they can't even feed my daughter at the hospital. I'm embarrassed to say that, because we have a wonderful hospital in Rochester, but they cannot make the food that she can eat. They don't know how to feed it to her. She wouldn't eat if I wasn't there. I had to bring all her things with her when she's in that situation. So I completely
you talked about it earlier with Tammy, the nuances that we know of our children's care, because we were parents of these nonverbal kids, that it becomes this twin speak almost, where there's this subconscious communication too, that we're not even really paying attention on the forefront of their body language, or if they make a certain tone in their voice, or if they move a certain way, something, it cues us in to respond a certain way. And how do we translate that to the rest of the world? It's a great question that I've had for myself for years. I want to. I do not want to be the only person on the planet that has that ability to intuitively respond to her needs, because I'm not going to be here forever. I don't know how to just write a book of Jaden so that everybody else can have her respond as calmly. But those years that we went through with catatonia, nothing would soothe her, nothing. She needed that medical intervention, and she didn't have access to it. And it was some of just the most traumatic experiences you can imagine. And like I said, I'm third generation of this. I should be prepared for this. Nothing prepared me for it. I was able to keep her home. I managed it somehow. Tons of broken walls, not just furniture, but tons of broken walls, everything. And we survived it. And we're in a much better, more stabilized place. But it's that drives me today in my advocacy, knowing all the other families that are in that exact moment right now, and they don't have 3 generations of information behind them, or any kind of resources, or any kind of know-how. I don't know how I survived it. I don't know how anybody possibly could.
When you think about the systems in place, if they can't handle our kids, like when I go back to when you think about these group homes, Steve and I had a family call us and say, they called the police on my son, and then they had everybody in the group home file a restraining order against him. It's where he lives. Now he's isolated in his room, not able to leave his room. There are staff members who are not allowed to interact with him. And you think, my goodness, he is being punished for a condition that if they understood him, if they had that sense about him, if they had the compassion and the training, and they weren't exhausted because they weren't working doubles and triples, because let's be honest, the DSPs are doing very hard work. If they can't do it, then how are we supposed to do it indefinitely? I say all the time, I can do this 24/7 right now, but I am almost 50. Then what do I do then? And then I'm going to get older. I can't do it forever. And then you think, then what comes next? How do we make the steps to the next things? And I think that families who are listening to this, they should definitely tune into all your different platforms. If you're a blog person, there's blogs, there's videos. We'll be posting obviously this episode on YouTube. We'll make some reels with it. We want to make sure that we get those bits and nuggets out to people so they feel less alone. In the podcast description, we'll list some of the initiatives, ways people can get involved. And I know it feels big to a parent who's drowning to say, oh, help us out with this advocacy effort. But sometimes knowing it's bigger than you and that you can make a difference is what keeps you going. If there's a piece of legislation that you can attach yourself to and say, this would make my life easier, then you have something you can accomplish. Because let's be honest, there's no magic wand. No one's going to come into our house and bop this away, right? It's there. And sometimes it gets worse. When hormones come into the picture in puberty, or a medical event happens, or a car accident, something that just could happen to anybody, but if it happens with your child, it can be a devastating ripple effect. So families need groups like your group. They do. They need it, and they need to, the medical professionals. It sounds like you're connected with different people, across different expertise. They need us to help them understand. I worked in a 500-bed facility, and I did training all the time. And people would say, I never thought of it that way. And I thought, okay, all right, that's that little stepping stone. Maybe that's where we broke the glass, we're getting through. They see us a little bit differently. And inclusion is wonderful because people see our kids being out in the community. But guess what? Sometimes we are not community ready. We have no business being in, the grocery store sometimes, but it doesn't mean I don't have to go shopping, so there's things that we're all facing. And If there's any last minute things that you have on your mind that you want to include that we haven't covered, this would be a good time, and then we'll close up.
Yeah, I like that you just said about, it's actually you that I'm going to ask a question to, Tammy. I like what you just said about feeling like you have so much going on right now. How are you going to advocate? Because it reminded me of my first meeting with you, interviewing you for state chair, and just everything you had going on. And you're like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm going to be, but I would love now that you've had this kind of time and you started setting up New York, what are really your thoughts after doing that? You know, do you feel that this has been more beneficial to you advocating, or has it been more stressful to you advocating? Like, what are the changes now that with your new role?
I feel like since I joined NCSA, it's definitely been more empowering because, like I kind of wrote today, is, you know, I've always worked in the field, but at that individual level. And I constantly was like, how do I make these changes? How do I get these dentists to take my son? Why is there no residential center in New York State taking him, like, for severe autism placements? I don't understand this. Even went to get my master's in ABA to feel like, well, they keep saying I just got to tell them no, we're not doing this. Like, so what am I doing wrong here? What am I doing wrong, you know? And then after all said and done, I'm like, okay, I'm not doing anything wrong today. I just really can't help me. Nobody knows how to do this. But as far as empowering, as far as working on the macro level and having the tools and the support and the, you know, resources to be able to come up with some solutions and ideas to figure out what needs to be changed. Obviously, things take time, but you know, working with NCSA, just starting from the summer on, Jackie's just been amazing with getting the board to fund so many different things, and you know, reaching out to our nationwide list, like support groups for our parents with severe autism, like constantly on them when they're having a bad day and sharing their story. Like, it's so hard in the sense to get parents to share stories. Being a social worker, having my son, I've had CPS show up at my house quite a few times. I mean, we'll call when he had cookie on his face, because that's what I had to do every day, is bribe him with the cookie to go to school. You know, things like that. Even I was like, well, his IEP goes because he doesn't like to wash his face, and they're supposed to be doing that. So why did they send him all this cookie on the face? So who's that wrong here? But the point is that it's very scary to ask for help and to really tell your story in this situation, because our families have faced CPS issues so many times throughout the years. I think things are getting a little bit better because the understanding of what we're going through is helping. But, you know, even those kind of things, spreading our stories nationally, and really, you know, if it's a CPS worker watching a reel, you know what I mean? It's going to be in the back of their head, you know, the next case that they actually have, to see that, no, we are literally giving every single thing we have, everything, all of us, you know, that are taking care of our children, and to be questioned, you know, by an outside person is very heartbreaking. And we get scared of our other children, you know, being, because that's who they'll take. They're going to remove your other children. They're not going to take your one that they have nowhere to put. So it is scary, and
I never thought of it that way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have never thought of it that way. That's terrifying. That's terrifying for your other kids too.
Yes.
You know, to feel that instability at such a profound level. There's such an institutional bias in all of this too, right? Mm-hmm. Like, they want to send our kids away, or they want to have like a placement for them, instead of looking at us in the home, in our communities, and see how they could support us in those settings. Like in New York, if you are in a certified setting, if you are in a group home, there's a tax break there. They don't pay property tax on that house. Now, I have 4 kids with disabilities living at my house, no tax break, right? You know, like you just think like, why can't we have what you have? If you want us to shoulder this, you have to give a little bit too. If 80% of the budget goes to certified, but only 25% of the people are in that option, what the other 75% need help too. And when we're talking about profound autism, severe autism, the ones that have the really complex behaviors, that takes a team. That's not just a mom or a dad who can make that happen for that kid. And when we're a caregiver, we burn out. And then we're more prone to having medical issues too. That's what I'm terrified of. What if I get sick? What if I can't do this? So I think that when we're looking at legislation, the families that are watching this, in your own individual states, you can do bill finders. And you can look up different legislation that you're interested in. That's wonderful. You can attach yourself to something. But look at NCSA. Go to their website, visit their Facebook group. Cling on to people who understand. And I think that's a good place for us to stop for today, because we could keep going on and on, but the truth of the matter is this is an ongoing discussion, and there'll be other chances to talk about it, and we're really grateful that you came on today so that we could talk about these things.
Thank you so much for having us.
Jackie, I look forward to working with you on a national level with the advocacy part of it. Thank you for having your organization. I think it's important for parents to know it. And to Tammy, look, you live this too, like I do, same as Jackie. I remember the first time I ever met you, the first time we Zoomed. We could have talked probably for hours because we've lived this. And we have the stories, and it's nice to know that there's a platform out there to help us get those stories out there. So thank you for both for coming on.
Thank you, Steve. Yes, we're going to have you on too at NCSA. We're looking forward to working with you on your new rec center project there. That's exciting.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And until next time.
Continue the conversation by joining our Facebook group. If you're a fan of the show, please join our supporters club. Subscribe on YouTube. Rate and review on your favorite listening app, but most of all, share it with your friends. Just one more click or comment can make a huge difference and help us to continue finding common ground.